I'm Jack, and welcome back because today is the conclusion of my series of Star Wars film reviews revolving around the Skywalker Saga as it comes to a close, where I talk about the final film in the sequel trilogy, Star Wars The Rise of Skywalker. It is once again directed by J.J. Abrams, who comes back after directing The Force Awakens, and it brings back the cast of the sequel trilogy with some new faces. And with that said, let's get started. The Rise of Skywalker concludes the landmark Skywalker Saga and follows the Resistance as they discovered that Emperor Palpatine is actually still alive after the events of Return of the Jedi. And so Rey, Finn, Poe, 3PO, and Chewbacca go on a mission to find out where is Palpatine hiding as they and the Resistance go head-to-head in a final confrontation with the First Order. If you haven't seen The Rise of Skywalker, this review will have spoilers, so if you haven't seen the movie yet, this is your only warning. I loved Star Wars The Force Awakens, and I'm on the group of people that really liked Star Wars The Last Jedi for what it did for the saga. It wasn't the ideal middle chapter for a movie like The Force Awakens, but as its own thing, I think I really appreciate the movie. So I was really excited to see The Rise of Skywalker conclude one of my favorite franchises of all time with the Skywalker Saga, and to see how it was going to close out the character arcs of the sequel trilogy, and so as this whole saga. And after 2 years of waiting for this movie and finally getting the chance to watch it, and especially after rewatches, I thought Star Wars The Rise of Skywalker is a very disappointing conclusion to the Skywalker Saga. It's not my least favorite Star Wars movie, especially on rewatch, but it really sours a lot of things I love about Star Wars here. And on rewatch, I think I liked it a little bit less than I did the previous time. And I think to kick things off, I think it had a great opening. Seeing Kylo Ren kill all those people on Mustafar was a great way to jumpstart the movie. I love Adam Driver's Kylo Ren, especially with the rest of the cast. Everyone's great. Everyone's great in this movie, especially Daisy Ridley and Adam Driver and Ian McDiarmid. I think everybody in the cast is great. And I really loved Anthony Daniels as C-3PO in this movie. And from that point, the movie is really great here. It's still a well-acted movie, and I think the opening is a great way to kick things off with Kylo Ren killing all those people on Mustafar so we can find this Wayfinder. It's awesome. Visually, it's stunning. I love the score in the background. And it really just shows us how powerful Kylo Ren is. And that's a great way to kick things off. And then he goes to Exegol, where we find out that Palpatine has been hiding there ever since the destruction of the Death Star back in Return of the Jedi. And this is a very mixed bag for me, mixed to negative, because I love Ian McDiarmid as Palpatine, but they should not have brought him back for this movie. As much as I love him as the character and how great he was in the prequels and the original trilogy, they should have left him dead, because bringing back Palpatine just undoes how important the Chosen One prophecy is, with Anakin becoming the one that will overthrow the dark side and bring balance to the Force. And by the end of Return of the Jedi, he does just that. But bringing back Palpatine just undoes all of that, makes it absolutely meaningless, because now Palpatine's alive and Vader is dead. So it just left me like one of the biggest parts about Star Wars thrown away. And this movie makes it stick out like a sore thumb, and I cannot really ignore it. And it really just bugs the movie for me. And I just did not think bringing back Palpatine as this main villain for the movie was that great of an idea in the first place. And even in terms of story ideas, I think this is probably the worst Star Wars movie in terms of ideas. Even less than Attack the Clones and Phantom Menace, because those two movies, not great movies, but they had good ideas. They just needed better execution. Here, the ideas were executed well. It's just the ideas themselves that I'm not really a fan of. And I just don't like how it just works against some movies. And it continues in a way where, as somebody who likes Last Jedi, I feel just unhappy with how it handled Last Jedi, where we find out that the Resistance is still low on manpower, it's still low on supply. People aren't fighting up against the First Order. And I'm just like, it just makes Luke Skywalker's death in the end of Last Jedi absolutely meaningless. You can say whatever you want about Last Jedi, but his death scene, I think, is fantastic. And I love how it wraps up his whole story, especially with the binary sons on Ahch-To, with how it mirrors his journey starting in New Hope. And the final scene of Last Jedi now feels meaningless, because that whole scene was supposed to show how, oh, the galaxy apparently is inspired by Luke's death to fight back against the First Order, and that's a great way to leave things off. But in this movie, it was like people were still scared. Apparently, the Resistance is still struggling, and they don't seem to be doing any better than they were in Last Jedi. And I'm just like, the whole movie is just meaningless now. It just doesn't feel like Rise of Skywalker wants to acknowledge what The Last Jedi did just because it was so divisive and controversial amongst the Star Wars fandom. And it really just bugs me as somebody who actually really likes that movie and still does. And I think it's just, it leads to some iconic moment where Poe Dameron says,
"Somehow Palpatine returned."
That just summarizes the whole movie right there, is that somehow Palpatine returned. That's the main point of The Rise of Skywalker here. And one thing I do appreciate of this movie is we finally got to see Rey, Finn, and Poe all together for the first time in this trilogy. You never got to see all of them together in Force Awakens, nor do you get to see a whole scene with them in Last Jedi. This is the first time in the trilogy where we finally got to see them all together. And it was nice to see, and I wish we got a lot more of them in the trilogy together, not in just this movie, but even in the other two, because I would have wanted to have got more from their relationship with one another, because in Rise of Skywalker, it's like, this is the final movie. We got to have our characters together, and so some of the moments that should have been very impactful ended up not really making me feel as much like I did with Luke, Han, and Leia, because we didn't get as much of Rey, Finn, and Poe together in the trilogy the way we should have. And the one compliment I can say about that is we got to see them together. It gives me some original trilogy Luke, Han, and Leia vibes, just not quite all the way up there, but it was just nice to see them all together on a mission nonetheless. And so they leave the base and they try to go find this Wayfinder, and so they go to all these planets like Pasana. And I love just how that little reference C-3PO made to New Hope with how the celebration happens every 42 years. And at that time, 42 years before that was A New Hope. That was a nice reference there. I do really enjoy that. And they travel, and we continue to see more of the dyad between Rey and Kylo. And just like in The Last Jedi, I think they're filmed really well here. I love just how, even if the two characters are in different locations, I do love how it does feel like they're both filming this on the same place. And I think still really well done here, especially with just the locations here. I think the Force dyad stuff is still interesting here, and what they do with Rey and Kylo I think is solid for the most part, even though I really actually liked what they do with Kylo aside from a few things. But the dyad stuff here is really great. We got some chase sequences with all of them and the stormtroopers, and it's kind of funny how in this movie we actually got to see TIE fighters able to go to light speed, and so as stormtroopers are now able to fly.
They fly now!
So that's a weird idea, but I guess for the movie it kind of works for what it was trying to do, even though it's kind of a goofy idea in the first place. And this also brings me to another issue I have with the movie, and that it is the most convenient Star Wars movie of all 9, including the spin-off movies, because a lot of the stuff in this movie just in a way doesn't feel like it makes sense, nor does it line up with what other movies have told. So it just creates all these different scenarios as to how this is the case, especially with the new Force ability, Force Healing, which was given to us in an episode of Mandalorian that came out before this movie did. But in this movie, it was like, this is just made as a plot device so that they can just push the story along as, yes, this doesn't make sense, but we're going to go with it. And I think that ability is interesting to me, and I wish they developed it more and not made it like it was just a new thing, because then it raises a lot of questions with the other Star Wars movies. Like, Force Healing could have fixed everyone's problems, but now we're discovering that it can be a thing, and it's just like, it's kind of a weird thing there. I wish they touched upon it more. And eventually, Pasana, Rey and the Resistance members, they try to escape, and we see a cool sequence where Rey is out in the middle of the desert, and Kylo Ren's in a TIE fighter, and he's coming right at her. And I think that is a cool sequence. By far, it's a very visually good-looking movie, just like with Last Jedi, perhaps one of the best. I think it's just a very well-shot movie. It's a good-looking movie in terms of its visual effects and just all the stuff there. I think it's a well-crafted movie in terms of the acting, the visuals, and the cinematography work. All that stuff is great. And so we have that moment. with Rey and Kylo, and I thought that was really cool. And so the Knights of Ren finally come into the fold. We got a vision of them in Force Awakens, but the Rise of Skywalker is the first time we finally got to see them all together. And they were underwhelming to me. There is a lot more they could have done with them, but I did not think the movie capitalized on them. Neither did the whole trilogy. And so I wish we got a lot more of them because they could have been cool characters nonetheless. And they kidnapped Chewbacca, and then Finn and Poe, they react to this, they tell Rey about it, and then Rey, with the Force, tries to stop that transport carrier from getting away with Chewbacca, and then Kylo Ren used the Force, and you had some very intense moment where both of them are using the Force, and they're trying to get it on their side. Kylo's trying to stop Rey, Rey's trying to save Chewie, and then Force lightning happens, and it starts to leave a mystery where we get a little bit more about Rey. In Force Awakens, we see how Rey is somehow really powerful with the Force, but we don't exactly know, like, who was her parents and what did she come from with the Force. And Last Jedi had a scene with Luke where Luke sees how Rey is very powerful with the Force and even lean towards the dark. So there are some ideas there. And then you have the Force lightning bit here, which really starts to make us think, is Rey who we think she is? Especially in the reveal in The Last Jedi that she came from nobody. Their parents weren't related to any big Star Wars character in a sense. And so our heroes go to Kijimi, where we meet Babu Frick and other characters like Zori. And Babu Frick I love, and I'm happy he's in Mandalorian Season 3. And so they go there because C-3PO, he translated what's in the dagger so that they can find the Wayfinder. However, he can't openly speak Sith because it's forbidden. And so they have to go to Babu Frick to bust his head wide open, which would cause a memory reset. And that was an emotional moment in a sense because I love C-3PO the character. But another thing I had an issue with in the entire trilogy is the characters treat C-3PO so poorly that when he says, I'm taking one last look at my friends, I don't feel much from that because I never got the gist that Poe, Rey, and them were really friends with C-3PO because all they did was kind of make C-3PO miserable and they kind of made him feel bad. And they didn't treat 3PO as well as Luke and Leia did to him, and so as even Anakin and Obi-Wan in the prequel trilogy. And I didn't think I felt enough emotional weight behind this movie, and that's a big thing. I never felt emotional weight behind anything, and it really hurts for me to say it because it's the final movie in the saga, and I don't feel much out of it. And so they wiped his memory, he translates, and he says what the message in the Wayfinder was in Sith, and we find out that in the Star Destroyer above Kijimi, that Chewbacca is actually not dead and that Chewbacca is alive, and that brings me to yet another issue I have with this movie. The fake out deaths. This is not the only time it ever happens in this movie. And it really weakens the sense of urgency here to where I'm not really feeling any suspense. Because there are so many moments here where characters are thought to be dead, but then they come back. Chewbacca is one of them, for instance. And Rey is one of them, for instance, especially in the end, but I'll get into that later. And C-3PO, because they wipe his memory only for R2-D2 to give it back to him around the time the third act's about to commence. And I'm just like, I don't feel any weight behind it. And so they go onto the Star Destroyer in a fun little sequence where Rey, Finn, and Poe, they go onto the Star Destroyer to find Chewbacca. And visually, it's well shot. I love seeing Oscar Isaac and John Boyega alongside one another here and see them try to escape with Chewbacca. Fun little moment for as long as it lasted. And Rey has a cool duel with Kylo Ren from just the Force dyad piece and just what happened where Kylo just starts to really question. It's like, your parents are nobodies, but that's because they chose to be and not because they were nobodies. And that Palpatine wants Rey dead and that Kylo Ren told her about it. And so it's just a really neat sequence. It's not one of the best lightsaber duels of all time, but I still think the filmmaking here, especially from the dyad, how that works, I think is cool. Just seeing them go from one place to another. One place we see them fight on Kijimi on the ground, and then another second we see them duel in the room on the Star Destroyer with Darth Vader's helmet. And it's a cool little scene, visually great as usual, and I loved Adam Driver and Daisy Ridley there. And so that commences, and then we find out that General Hux is a spy. And another big problem I had with this entire trilogy is after The Force Awakens, they utterly wasted Hux. I was very disappointed in how they handled that character. I thought in Force Awakens he was great. I love that speech he made with this being the end of the Resistance, especially with the destruction of the Osnian system. I thought that was great. In Last Jedi, they just kind of made him the butt end of jokes, and they made him just weak and like, oh, he's just a buffoon, and I just did not like that. Rise of Skywalker, they decide to make him a spy, and it just feels thrown in there. There was no development. There was no build up to him being a spy, and I think here it felt like just a last minute add in so that they could just push the story along, like, oh yeah, there's a spy information, and it just was like, it just felt out of the blue for me, and I just did not like how they treated Hux in the trilogy as a whole. So what they did with him just really disappointing to me. And so we get the true reveal of Rey's parentage, and that she's not coming from nobodies, but that she's actually the granddaughter of Emperor Palpatine. I don't like that twist. I'm being honest with you. I love the reveal that she was just nobody, that nobody that we know of was her parents. I like that idea that, oh, they were just junk traders that sold her for drug money. I like that. And so I didn't like the reveal that they made her a Palpatine. And I get there are two scenes in the trilogy as a whole with Force Awakens and Last Jedi where they teased that there is more to Rey than meets the eye, especially with how powerful she is. But the Palpatine twist feels so out of left field. It came so out of nowhere. It had no proper development for me to really get shocked by it, especially on future viewings. And it just continues to add to one of my biggest overall issues with the movie, and especially the whole sequel trilogy. It's so inconsistent. They had absolutely no plan with this movie, and I think they've said so themselves. Force Awakens started one thing. Last Jedi, as much as I like it, went into a very different direction from what Force Awakens was trying to tell. Rise of Skywalker undoes Last Jedi and tries to be more of a spiritual successor to Force Awakens, and therefore it feels like two movies mashed as one. And it feels like the first half of this movie felt like a middle chapter, and then the climax of this movie is the real final chapter. And it's just so messy. It's a very messy movie. Even the story, once it really kicks in, it just so many conveniences. It just go from point A to point B to point C. And I just did not feel like it was naturally progressing. It feels like things were being slowed down or things were going too quickly. We don't have enough time to breathe. It is just a very messy movie in terms of story. It's by far one of the messiest in the Star Wars saga as a whole. And I think even the reveal of Rey being a Palpatine just should not have happened, in my opinion. I like the reveal of her just coming from no one. So I wish they stuck with that rather than make her a Palpatine. And it just adds to another issue I have that I will mention later on. And so eventually after that reveal, Rey escapes with Finn, Poe, Chewbacca, 3PO, and they go to find the ruins of the second Death Star, where Rey leaves the crew so that she can go find this Wayfinder. And we see her go through all these Death Star 2 ruins. And a funny thing about this is in Return of the Jedi, the Death Star 2 blew up. Like, there was no pieces of it left. So how were there ruins? That's just kind of odd to me. It feels like, was it really fully destroyed like we thought in Return of the Jedi? It just feels like a continuity error for me for some reason. And so we have actually a really cool sequence where Rey confronts Kylo on that Death Star 2, and he has the Wayfinder and destroys it. And it's a cool duel. By far the best lightsaber duel out of this movie. I think it's well shot. I really like Daisy Ridley and Adam Driver as these characters. And I really like the environment too, with the ocean, the current, and just the Death Star ruins. It is a really awesome action sequence. And I love seeing them just force jump, use the Force in combat. I think that was a really cool moment. I think it's a great duel. Not one of the best in Star Wars history, but for the sequel trilogy, and especially this movie, it's a really cool one. I really like the sequence. And then as Rey stabbed Kylo, just because Kylo's starting to sense Leia has died. And no matter how I feel about this movie, I think they did the best they could with Leia, especially after Carrie Fisher passing away back in 2016. This was a really hard feat. I feel like they were in such a hard corner that it was like they were just like, we had to do something. They can't kill her off screen. That would be pretty disrespectful. So I'm glad that they found a way to still do Leia in this movie and honor her character while trying to tell the story and not try to do things that wouldn't be right, especially with the character of Leia. And so they did a good job using old footage of her from Force Awakens and even Last Jedi. I think was a interesting idea, and it's just interesting, and I think they pulled it off really well. So especially for that moment there, which is a really tragic moment, I think they did the best they could with Leia, and I think everything that happened with her character, I really did enjoy. And so Rey uses Force healing again, saves Kylo Ren, another plot convenient moment right there, and she leaves. She leaves Finn and them again, and she goes to Ahch-To, where we get a Force Ghost confrontation from Luke, as Rey looks like she was about to destroy the lightsaber and strand herself there. I think seeing Mark Hamill again is great. Again, I love Mark Hamill. I love him as Luke Skywalker, and I felt it was cool to see him return to this movie. And I think he and Daisy Ridley had a great dynamic with one another, especially in The Last Jedi. And so it was nice to see Mark Hamill again in this movie. And we got to learn that Leia also trained to be a Jedi, and she had her own lightsaber. And so Rey ended up taking her lightsaber. And we learned that ever since the last day of training back in the day, Leia decided to stop training to be a Jedi, especially after she sensed the possible death of her son. And it was interesting to me. I think that was a neat little flashback sequence for what it was. And then Poe, Finn, C-3PO, and Chewbacca, they all return to the Resistance base to find out that Leia has passed away. This is by far the most emotional part of this movie, even though I didn't feel like a lot of the stuff worked as much for me. But I think that moment, Leia's death, I think worked the best when it comes to emotional weight. Because I love Carrie Fisher as Leia, and I love that character, and I think for what they had to work with in this movie, I think they pulled it off well. And so this moment, it was an emotional moment, I admit, to see Chewbacca just in agony, to just see how Leia's gone. The original trilogy characters are gone. Luke, Han, Leia, they've all passed away in each of the sequel trilogy movies. And that brings me to not really an issue of just this movie, but more of the whole trilogy yet again, and that's we didn't get to see a scene with Mark, Harrison, and Carrie all together. And that feels like an absolute wasted opportunity. You had one of the most iconic trinities of all time with Luke, Han, and Leia. And I love their camaraderie and their dynamic with one another in the original trilogy. And when I found out they were all going to be in the sequel trilogy, I was on cloud nine. I thought that was just awesome to see them come back again. And I was hoping we would get a scene with them all together, but we never did. We only got to see Han have a scene with Leia. Leia gets to have a scene with Luke and Han on separate occasions. And that was the most we got. And it really bums me out because as someone who adores the original trilogy with all my heart, seeing that we never got to see them all together again, it really disappoints me, especially for how much potential we had there. It could have happened any point throughout Force Awakens or Last Jedi, but we just never got the chance. And it will forever be a wasted opportunity. And as much as I love those three, it just saddens me that we never got to see them all together again, especially after that beautiful ending in Star Wars Return of the Jedi. And Billy D. Williams gets to return as Lando in The Rise of Skywalker for the first time since the end of the original trilogy. And it's nice. I love Billy D. Williams as Lando. I think he's charming. I think he's great. And I really liked his character. And so it was nice to see him with the Resistance and with Poe and these newer characters in the trilogy, because now that we had Han, Luke, and Leia and Chewbacca in them, it was like, when is Lando going to show up? And we finally got to see him return. I think it was nice to see him again. And then we find out earlier in this movie, it was revealed that Palpatine has an entire fleet of Star Destroyers that are dubbed the Final Order that Kylo Ren could use to completely take control of the galaxy as they wipe out the Resistance. And that felt random to me, especially for that. It's like instead of another Death Star, because we already had Death Star 2, and Starkiller Base, now we got all these Star Destroyers that have planet-killing technology, and that feels very convenient to me once again, and it just feels weird because it's like, how did all this happen in 30 years? He's only been on Exegol for 31 years, so it's like, how did all of a sudden he have all this Star Destroyers just in perfect form in that much time? Because I can imagine Star Destroyers are not easy to just create and just to have them the way they are. So that just feels kind of weird to me. But we learn how, yes, the Palpatine has these weapons and that he's going to unleash them in a few hours, that Kylo Ren, the First Order, are going to use them to completely take control. And so Rey goes to Exegol to confront Palpatine once and for all, and then the Resistance, Lando, Chewbacca, and them take the Falcon. They try to get as many people as they can to help the Resistance, and the Resistance goes to Exegol as they follow Rey there. And then Rey finally meets Palpatine, and we learn that Palpatine didn't actually want her dead, but rather for her to become the new ruler of the Sith. And that is very weird, especially after how in the first half of this movie, Palpatine wants Kylo to kill Rey, but then in the third act, it's like, I didn't want you dead, I wanted you here. And that feels random to me. If you want her to die, then stick with her wanting to die. But for some reason, it was like, that's what was started. That's what was stated at first. But then as you continue, it was like, no, I didn't want her dead. And that was just so odd to me. It just feels like they didn't quite make it as streamlined as they could have with Palpatine's goal here. They are in absolute danger, and it leads to a moment in the third act that should have been amazing. It should have been so incredibly satisfying, where Lando and Chewbacca on the Falcon, they lead the entire ships of all across people from the galaxy to come to Exegol to help fight alongside the Resistance. And that moment just feels very cheap to me. It did not feel earned. It didn't feel satisfying to me. It should have, but it feels like a copy off of the Portals sequence in Avengers Endgame, but worse. And it did not feel like it was properly built up to, because the Rise of Skywalker had it start out as people were still afraid to fight the First Order. And it just doesn't, which also doesn't properly line up with the ending of Last Jedi. And so when this moment finally happens, it was like, obviously they had to come to help save the day, but it didn't feel like it was built up to. It didn't feel like it was developed enough for this moment to feel satisfying as it could have and should have been. And that brings me to another big issue I have with this movie. Fan service. I love good fan service. Avengers Endgame, Spider-Man No Way Home. This movie does not do it right. This is probably one of my least favorite uses of fan service, because the story itself isn't that great, and that the fan service is just like, it doesn't feel earned to me, especially in the climax of this movie. There are some cute fan service moments every now and then that are nice, they're cute, especially with the scene with Kylo Ren and Han Solo, where after Rey leaves, you have Kylo Ren talk to Han. And I think it's a nice scene. By far one of the best in this entire movie. I love Harrison Ford as Han Solo, and so as Adam Driver as the character. And I love that interaction, how it mirrors that scene in The Force Awakens, where you knew that deep down throughout the trilogy that Kylo regretted that he killed Han. You still see that here. And I think that was the one constant to come over from Last Jedi. And so I really like that scene with him and Han, and how it mirrors Force Awakens in a way where it's like, this is a second chance for Kylo to do the right thing, where it's like, he killed him, I'm sorry, I knew what I have to do, but I don't know if I have the strength to do it. And how it mirrored Empire Strikes Back, where Kylo was about to say, I love you, but then Han just responds with, I know, right before Kylo can even say it. And then he tosses out his lightsaber to completely change as that he's Kylo Ren no more. And I think that itself is a really great scene. By far one of my favorites to come out of the Sequel Trilogy and this movie. And that is one of the best uses of fan service, because as a whole, I don't think the fan service feels earned. It didn't feel like it amounted to anything other than to just play off as a very safe movie while just not being satisfying. And so Ben Solo turned back to the light. He goes to Exegol to help Rey, and he confronts the Knights of Ren, and it looked like they had him to a pulp, and right when it looks like Rey was about to take out that lightsaber and kill Palpatine, and so all the Sith could fully transfer onto her, with the dyad, she gives the lightsaber to Kylo. That's a great scene. The idea of Ben Solo being redeemed is a good idea. I just wish they had more development. But for what it was, I think it worked to just see Ben turn back to the light. And so it was a cool sequence seeing Ben take down the Knights of Ren, kill them all, especially as he turned over to the light and that he's no longer a Sith Lord like he was before. And so Rey takes out the other lightsaber and just attacks all of those guards. And I think we see them reunite in the flesh. And I think that was really cool to see them together again, both on the light as they're about to take down Palpatine. And then Palpatine uses abilities and realizes that the life force both of them had with the dyad gives him enough power to officially just come back in a form that doesn't make him look like a zombie. And he force tosses Ben Solo into like an abyss. We did not see what happened to him in that time. And Rey looks out as Palpatine is about to wipe out the Resistance so that the Final Order can take over the galaxy. And in another terrific moment in this movie, we see Rey whisper, "Be with me," and she looks out into the stars, and we see all these Jedi talk to her to rise and to fight Palpatine, and that these are your final steps. And we hear Hayden Christensen return as Anakin, Ewan McGregor's Obi-Wan, Liam Neeson as Qui-Gon, Freddie Prinze Jr. as Kanan Jarrus from Star Wars Rebels, and Ahsoka Tano, Mace Windu, and Yoda. We got to hear voices of the Jedi, and I think that is a really cool moment. I think it's by far one of the best to come out of this movie, and it is just satisfying to see right when it looked like all hope was lost for the Resistance, as Palpatine is in full unlimited power, and that Rey is down on the ground and she reaches out and the Jedi come to her and tell her to rise. And it all culminates in a satisfying way where Mark Hamill's Luke is the last Jedi to say anything and was like, "The Force will be with you always." And that is just a great moment. Really love it. And so Rey confronts Palpatine, and Palpatine's like,
"I am all the Sith."
And I... I'm all the Jedi.
The idea of her being the one to kill Palpatine, that's a good idea. I didn't think the lines were right. Personally, I think they could have done something different than just "I am all the Sith and I am all the Jedi," because once again, it feels like a copy off of what Avengers Endgame did, where in Endgame it was, "I am inevitable and I am Iron Man." So with Rise of Skywalker, it feels blatantly obvious that this felt like a ripoff of what Endgame did, and it did not feel original to me, and it didn't feel as satisfying as it could have been, because this is the grand climax of the saga. This is where we finally see our main protagonist overthrow our villain. And the last line they say felt like it came out of another movie. And so Palpatine is dead. Rey killed her. The Final Order has been destroyed. All the Star Destroyers are being destroyed, as Finn and the Resistance and them have destroyed the central Star Destroyer that must be destroyed. They also teased earlier in the movie that Finn had a secret. And it feels weird to me that in the end they never reveal it. And that is, in an interview, confirmed that Finn is Force sensitive. I love the idea of him being Force sensitive, because Force Awakens made it seem like he was going to be this big Jedi. But the trilogy really did this character so dirty. Force Awakens, I loved him there. Last Jedi, they gave him my least favorite subplot in the whole movie. Rise of Skywalker, did not like how they handled his character. He did not feel important. He didn't feel like he added to much in this movie. And that really disappoints me, because I love John Boyega's character, and I was not satisfied with how they handled Finn in this movie. And so Ben Solo rises from the depths he's been tossed into, and then he sees that Rey is dead after her killing Palpatine with the Jedi and lightsabers and the Force lightning. And so he uses Force healing to bring her back, and she wakes up and they look at each other and she is like, "Ben." And it's a happy moment. It's like they're back, and then they kiss. I don't like the kiss personally. I've never really been a kind of person who ships Rey and Ben Solo together. I've always been more of a Rey and Finn person, in my opinion. And I didn't think they needed to kiss, especially after all the things that's happened to those two in the trilogy, with Kylo Ren first abducting her in Force Awakens, to turning her into Snoke, and just all the stuff, and her running away from him. It just, having it all culminate in a kiss feels weird to me. It didn't feel like it was needed. If you're gonna have Ben Solo live, then okay, just have him kiss. But if you're gonna kill off Ben, which is what they ended up doing, I don't think a kiss was needed, personally. And for the most part, I really liked what they did with Ben Solo up until the kiss. That's the one thing about his character I just did not like in this movie. But how they did that, I think, was fine. There were some things I think could have been done differently, but I think for the most part, I liked what they did with Ben Solo in this trilogy, especially in this movie. He's by far the best character in this movie. And then the Resistance celebrates to see all these planets, and the final order has been destroyed, and there's once again peace in the galaxy, and you see the Resistance celebrate back on their base with Zori and Lando and Xana and just all these other characters. And then Rey returns alongside with Finn and Poe, and they have a hug moment. I did not feel very much out of that moment. It should have been big. I should have been in tears watching that moment, but it did not feel like it amounted to much emotional weight for me because this is the first time we got to see them together. And so I'm sitting there like, nice, they're hugging, but this is the first time and only time we've seen them all together in the trilogy. And so this moment didn't feel like it comes off as impactful for me the way it did with Luke, Han, and Leia in the Return of the Jedi. And so it's a moment where it symbolizes that the Resistance have won. The war is over. But the emotional weight did not feel like it was there for me because the story itself wasn't that compelling and didn't have a lot of great ideas, that it made the ending, what should have been an extremely emotional resolution to the saga, just come off as okay. And then in the final scene in this movie, Rey alongside BB-8 take the Millennium Falcon to Tatooine for the very first time in this trilogy. And she goes to Lars' homestead where it all began and buries Luke and Leia's sabers, even if Luke's saber belonged to Anakin. And then she takes out her staff, and it turns out she constructed it to a lightsaber that turns yellow. That is really cool to finally see a yellow lightsaber in the Star Wars movies. And then she sees a stranger ask and tells her how, there's no one has lived here in so long, and asks, who are you? And Rey responds with, I'm Rey. And then the stranger responds, Rey who? And then Rey looks out into the distance and sees Force ghosts of Luke and Leia, and then responds as the final line to culminate this entire saga,
Rey Skywalker.
The idea of Rey being a Skywalker, especially over time, doesn't bother me. I don't think it's a horrible idea, but it didn't feel like it was developed as much as it could have, because it gives me the idea of just adopted family. That the Skywalkers apparently have adopted her into the family because they loved Rey, they cared for her. And so I think this was a neat idea. It's just the idea didn't feel well executed, nor did it feel as earned the way it could have, because I liked the nobody reveal, hated the Palpatine twist, and I did not think they developed the idea of her taking up the Skywalker name as well to feel satisfying as much to me. So I don't dislike the idea. I didn't love it either, and I think in the end it's a moment where I feel like there could have been more development there for me to really feel the weight behind it. And so she takes on the Skywalker name, and she and BB-8 look out into the twin suns of Tatooine with a beautiful shot, and it culminates the Rise of Skywalker, the Sequel Trilogy, and the entire saga as a whole. And therefore, the Rise of Skywalker comes to a close. It's not my least favorite Star Wars movie. There are some entertaining moments out of this movie that I do really like, but it's a very underwhelming conclusion. There are some great acting, a terrific score by John Williams here that I love, great action sequences. I love that we finally got to see Rey, Finn, and Poe all together, and I think the visuals and cinematography, excellent. Still a well-shot movie. From that area of things, it's still a competently made movie. But the story wasn't that good in my opinion. The fan service did not feel earned. And it does not feel like a proper successor to what The Last Jedi set up. And it feels more like a spiritual successor to Force Awakens. And it highlights how this trilogy is so inconsistent, had no apparent plan, that in the end, it sours this entire trilogy for me. And it just makes The Rise of Skywalker a movie where I don't hate it, I don't despise it, but I didn't quite like this movie as much either, and it really disappoints me, especially as this is the grand finale to the Skywalker Saga. So with that said, I'm going to give Star Wars The Rise of Skywalker a C+. There are moments here I love, the cast here is great, the visuals are fantastic, but the story is just not all that great. And a lot of things about it just do not work for me at all. And it pains me to just be disappointed in this movie because I want to love this movie. I really, really do. But the movie just left a sour taste for me with how I view the sequel trilogy as a whole, and it really just severely hurts it for me. And as somebody who loved Force Awakens and was so excited to see this new trilogy play out, I was very underwhelmed by the end result. And I pray that if Disney makes another Star Wars trilogy, that they have a plan. They have directors or a director who will have a consistent plan from start to finish. And I hope they really do it, because this trilogy was full of wasted potential and inconsistencies. And I really hope they do a much better job with the franchise, especially for making another trilogy of movies. So, while I still love Force Awakens and really like Last Jedi, this is by far every single issue in this trilogy. A lot of it comes from this movie. And even on rewatch, it still stands. And so I'm very let down by this movie. So yeah, those are my thoughts on Star Wars, The Rise of Skywalker. Let me know down below in the comments section. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this movie. Did you love this movie? Are you mixed on this movie, or did you not like this movie? I'd love to hear it down below and give me a point of reference. What's your overall opinion on the sequel trilogy? I'd love to hear it down below. And thank you guys so much for tuning in to my series of Star Wars film reviews about the Skywalker Saga. Obi-Wan Kenobi's released, so I will review it once the season is out and maybe give some short episode reviews leading up to then. And don't forget to follow me on social media. My username is down below at the bottom of the screen and in the description below. So please go do that while you're at it. And thank you guys so much for watching. And don't forget to hit that like button and the subscribe button, and stay tuned for more.
The Force will be with you.